good afternoon, evening, morning, everyone. Depends where you're listening from today. So my name is George Olah again, and today I'm going to talk about the different studies actually that me and my colleagues wrote, and also other people about parrots. And this talk is going to be like an introduction to this whole conference, this Parrot Expo, and also like a global overview about parrots in general. So I would like just walk you through this amazing group of birds in general. So on this first slide, you see the phylogeny, the life of tree of parrots, which you can see it's a very, very diverse group of birds. And you see that taxonomists put them in different categories like superfamilies, families, subfamilies, clades, and then like genera and species. We have about 400 parrot species around the world. It depends on the taxonomy. Sometimes they split species, like previous subspecies into species level. So then we have more species. Unfortunately, some species can disappear or go extinct when we lose species, but around 400 parrot species are currently extinct in the world. So this study that you're seeing now was published in 2018, where this group of researchers, they sampled 307 species, taxa, from this group of birds, and they based this study on 30 genes. So it's a very widespread and also very deep learning about these species that included 12 mitochondrial and 18 nuclear genes. And that's this is the phylogeny tree that you can see as the result of this new phylogeny or the newest one of the newest phylogeny of parrots. What the authors highlighted in this study was that only 1/3 of the species studied in this research had information or has been previously studied intraspecific level, which means like seeing differences within one species, because of course one species can have a huge distribution like the scarlet macaws that you can see here up there. And not many species been studied into this level of taxonomy. And this study also confirmed that the larger African species, like the gray parrots, the African grays, are in sister relationship, which means like they're really close, or these are the closest relatives to the neotropical species, which is all these upper part of the phylogeny tree. And then you see that some of the taxa are really species rich. For example, the Lorini, the lories are so many species represented, and also the Arini tribe, which includes many neotropical parrots. And of course, we have lots of strange parrots and very unique that mainly live in New Zealand and Australia. By the way, if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to write it in the comment section of the talk, and we're gonna look into the responses shortly. So in 2016, our group presented or published a study about the global status of parrots around the world, which in that time we had exactly 398 species, and we found that 28% of these were threatened. So what exactly threatened means in this context? So the IUCN Red List categorizes all species, and we have a very good understanding on most parrot species. And depending on the different criteria, they put each species into one of these categories. So these categories are, if we go to the bottom, for example, the least concerned species, and then near threatened species, which means that near threatened are one step closer to being considered as a threatened species. And then if you step up from there, all those species belong to the threatened categories. There are three hierarchical categories. One of them is vulnerable, and then endangered, and the most endangered species are the critically endangered ones. And sadly, there's also categories that are extinct in the wild. For example, the Spix's macaw. We have like one one species here represented, and also extinct. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this at the end of my talk, and also on next Friday, that we don't always know how many extinct species we talk about, because of course we can discover new species that knew as to they extinct a long time ago, and we didn't have any scientific record of their existence. But it's about 17 to 20 species that we think that existed of parrots that are now extinct today. And you see here all the numbers that represented in each of these category. And so if you sum all these species together that belong to the threatened categories, you have about 1/3 of the species threatened in parrots, which is a really high number. Parrots, the order of parrots, Psittaciformes, as we call it in Latin, they are one of the most threatened bird group, and they declining quite fast as well, as you will see later on this talk. So this map shows the distribution of these species. So this is like a heat map. You consider if it's like darker green, it means that there are more species overlapping in that part of the world. So you can see that, for example, South America is very, especially the Amazon basin and the Andes are very species rich, as well as Australia and New Guinea, that you see lots of parrot species. But of course, all of the Neotropics, the Afrotropics, including Madagascar and Indonesia, India, Indomalaya, they're all species distributed mainly in the tropical regions. And of course, we looked at the threatened species, like only highlighting species that belong to one of these categories. And this is the distribution of the threatened species. If you look at that map, you see that many species are threatened in the Amazon basin and also in New Zealand. So in this study that I am talking about in 2016, we look at the extinction risk of these birds, the parrots, in collaboration with BirdLife International. So BirdLife International had lots of data that we used, and the so-called intrinsic biological attributes. This means intrinsic factors because these are like inherent by the species. For example, the geographical distribution, the population density, trophic level, body size, generation length, diet, habitat specialization, that kind of stuff. And we also looked at external or anthropogenic threats, which means that it's not really dependent on the species itself, but different factors, like mainly us. That's why it's called anthropogenic effects that threatening the existence. So these are, for example, the growth of human populations in the area or overlapping where these species exist, also habitat loss and fragmentation, the illegal pet trade, and also many socio-economic circumstances in the range countries where these parrots distribute. So we used quite complicated statistical modeling, which was also controlled by the phylogenetic dependence, which means if some species are closer together, they usually share these different traits. So we control for that, that we're not actually finding something that two species showing something similar just because they're closely related. So after controlling this specific phylogenetic dependence, we looked at which of these factors pushes the one species or another to higher or lower level of being threatened. And what we found in that study was that there were 5 main threats or factors that actually explained significantly that one species was more threatened or less threatened. So we call this here on the y-axis that's the probability of threatened. So the higher that number is here, the higher chance is for that species or for that group of species, or for, in this case, the parrots in general, that they became threatened. And this was one of them was the historical distribution size. So by if they had originally, like historically, they had a small distribution size, like close to 0, they had a higher chance to being threatened. And the bigger this distribution size got, the less threatened these species became. The other was explaining factor was the size, the body size, which showed that larger species like macaws or cockatoos are more threatened, or more probable that they become threatened later on as well. The other one was the generation time, and this is kind of explaining also the body size, because usually the larger species, the longer they live. So long-lived species tended to be in higher risk. And also the forest dependency. You see, we had 4 categories defined by bird life, which is non-forest dependent, or low, medium, or high forest dependency for each species of parrots, and actually for other birds. Parrots are known that they are a group that are really highly forest dependent, most of the species. But these statistics actually showed and confirmed that within parrots, the more higher, the higher the species is dependent on the forest, the higher the risk gonna be to become threatened. And this is an interesting finding, and this also pushed that to look at more into this kind of effect that I will talk later on this talk today. And one of the interesting anthropogenic factor was the percentage of human population, the urban human populations, like people living in the city. If the range of the species overlapped with like a really high human population in urban area, that also pushed those species to be more threatened. So we looked at what threats, what are these threats, exact threats where the parrots were facing. And IUCN and BirdLife puts these different categories of threats, and we can define which species are affected or non-affected, and how severely these species are affected. So for example, unknown or past affected, impacted in the past, low impact, or high or medium impact. As you see, those are the black lines. So summing this all together, the highest threats was they were agriculture and logging. These were the highest threats. As you see, that the percentage of parrots is almost like 1/3 of all species are threatened by one of these threats. The second largest was hunting and trapping. And this is a definition that hunting, because it's also like relevant for other species, not only parrots, but they use these categories for all animals. And in parrots, this mainly means the trapping for the illegal pet trade. So that was also a very high percentage. Another interesting thing was climate change. Also a high impact was the invasive alien species. And for this threat, it was especially interesting to see, because we also found that parrot species that are affected by invasive alien species, for example, rats that eating the parrot's eggs, for example, as you saw in the animation, those species became not only more threatened, but also threatened in a higher level. As you see, there's like more critically endangered species relatively fall into this category if they are also impacted by invasive alien species in the range. So as this was a global distribution, we looked at priority countries. So all the countries that where parrots can be found, we categorize in 3 different ranks, or the different ranks. The first was the diversity rank, which means like the number of species found in that country. So the more species found in that country, the higher rank it got. Like Indonesia had rank number 1. It had the highest number of species, parrot species in the area. Then we had a threat rank, like means within that country more parrot species are threatened by different factors. And also an endemics rank, which means like how many endemic species live in that country, which is like very important that those species can only find in that country. So it's like really important for that specific country to protect that species, because there's nowhere else that species exist. So then we summed all these threats, and we come up with an overall rank, and that's what you can see here. Number 1 is Indonesia, second is Brazil, Australia, Colombia, etc. So these are just the first 20 countries, and you see that 15 of these are actually are in the Neotropics. And so this is important, that the rank here, it doesn't mean like the number 1 is the best. It's actually the worst for parrot conservation, and this is kind of a way of pinpointing which countries should really look into putting more efforts in the conservation in parrots in this specific case. As my colleague and mentor Don Brightsmith mentioned, this is also important because birds can move freely across borders, but policies don't. So each country, that might be just an artificial border which species can cross, but if one country really protects them, that can be reflected in those national regulations and the effect on that those populations living in that country. So talking about countries, we grouped these countries into 4 different regions, and based on which continent or which part of the world they are. So we have Neotropics in the Americas, Afrotropics in Africa. We have Indo-Malaya, which means everything from the Wallace's line to the west, and everything else to the east from the Wallace's line. We considered Australasia and Oceania. So in this division, you see that all these previously mentioned threat categories in different regions, there are different threats that are the highest. So for example, for the Neotropics, which is the black bar, you see that for them, it's the highest threat was agriculture. So more than 40% of parrot species were threatened by agriculture in the Neotropics. For Africa, the Afrotropics, the second threat was the highest, just hunting and trapping. For Indo-Malaya and also for Australia and Oceania, so all that region, the highest threat was logging and so on. So this also raises an important observation that we can't really just say something about parrots in general or in a global perspective. We really need to look into a closer, more specific way. So what we did in 2018, we published another study that only looked at that region, what I just mentioned, that everything to the east from Wallace's line, including Australia and Oceania. And here we also subdivided these regions for evaluation. So we had New Zealand in like a subcategory or a sub-region. You see here on the right side that although New Zealand only has like 6 parrot species, but many of them are really threatened, critically endangered, vulnerable. The other group was the Pacific, like all the Pacific islands that you can see here, that included 31 parrot species. Wallacea, that has its own subcategory, so everything Wallace's line, but excluding New Guinea and Australia. altogether 34 species living there. Australia with 50 species. That also includes all the offshore islands nearby Australia and Tasmania. And New Guinea, which is this island, this large island north from Australia. You see also by the color here, the more red you see, that means the more species living in that region. And you see that this part of New Guinea, New Guinea, the island itself, and especially the Central Highlands, are really rich in parrot species. Many species live there, exactly 46. But interestingly, you see that out of those 46 species, 41, so more than 90%, are actually least concern. And that was an interesting finding, because you would assume that there are lots of threatened species in New Guinea. And we still think that there are, but it's probably just comes down to the fact that not many research is done, scientific research or monitoring is done in New Guinea. And there are probably more species. If we would put more effort in monitoring there, we would probably find that species are actually more threatened than we think now. But you see that this is like southeastern Australia is also like very species rich, and we will come down to this again later on. So now I would like to show you just a short video abstract that summarizes this research that we published in 2018, and you can also find this on our YouTube channel.
Parrots are a group of birds that people everywhere have always found particularly fascinating. But what we might not realize is that parrots are also the most threatened group of birds in the whole world. Almost a third of them are threatened by extinction. And in this paper here, we're looking very closely, in particular, at our own region, the region surrounding Australia, called Oceania. So that includes the big continent of Australia. It includes New Guinea, Australasia, New Zealand, and the Pacific region. That region is incredible because it contains almost half the parrot species of the world.
For the data analysis, we used the BirdLife International database on parrots, and also the IUCN Red List categories, which is basically the conservation status of each species.
Oceania has a very high diversity, phylogenetic diversity of parrot species, and we found that 37 out of 167 species found here are threatened with extinction.
We find that there were 4 major threats that mainly affected parrots in this region. One of the most severe threats affecting parrots was the logging. So logging can affect parrots by selectively cutting down trees where the nest hollows can be found. The other threat was agriculture, and it's not only like big land clearings, but also monocultures like palm plantations. The third threat was hunting and trapping. So it's not only for human consumptions, but mainly for the illegal wildlife trade. The fourth major threat was invasive species. So introduced species like rats and possums can easily extirpate whole parrot populations or even a whole species.
Timber extraction, clearance for agriculture and logging. And these are some of the most important threats to parrots across the whole region of Oceania, extending from eastern Indonesia into the Pacific Islands. And this is a region that holds half of all critically endangered parrot species in the world.
Australia has an extraordinary diversity of parrot species. About 54 or so parrots live in Australia. But unfortunately, we found that Australia was probably the worst performer of any developed country in the world. Much of the parrot habitat was cleared for agriculture, and that has left very little habitat. And the other big problem in Australia is that there are many invasive species. And a good example of this is that the swift parrot is now considered critically endangered in Tasmania. Sugar gliders were introduced, and they become a terrible predator, and they kill the females while they're nesting in their tree hollows.
New Zealand has a small but diverse assortment of parrots, including an ancient family comprised of kakapo, kea, and kaka. It's also home to several parakeets belonging to the Cyanoraphis genus. The overwhelming threat facing parrots in the region is predation by introduced species, especially stoats and rats. Several New Zealand parrots, including kakapo and the orange-fronted parakeet, have declined so severely that they are now classified as critically endangered. The hope for these species rests with predator-free sanctuaries and intensively managed sites.
Sadly, we've already lost 5 parrot species from this region. There are several more species that are critically endangered. We are very likely to lose them if we don't learn from our mistakes. This paper has helped us to identify which variables really matter and also allow us to identify which species really need the most help.
So this video was made by Cynthia Garay, she's also gonna give a presentation tomorrow. She's the other co-founder of Wildlife Messengers that we will talk about later on. So this was a recap, a video abstract about this specific study. So I don't really go into more further details, but as you saw that, and Rob Heinzen, my colleague, mentioned that this region is really rich in species, and also the phylogenetic diversity of parrots is really concentrated in that part of the world, and it's really important to conserve. And the predictors of the high extinction risk in this 5 subregions, as you saw earlier on the map, was the small historical range size, large body size, high forest dependency again. If one species was single country endemic, which means like they can only be found in one single country, and also high unemployment rates in their country of distribution. And again, we looked at differences within the sub-regional level, and here you see that it's again not the same if we go further into details within this region. So for example, logging was a really high threat in New Zealand and also in the Wallacea region. But in New Zealand, the highest threat was actually the invasive species. All of the parrot species living in New Zealand were affected by invasive alien species. Agriculture was really high threat in Wallacea, and Wallacea, you see there are lots of many high threats that affecting about 40–50% of the parrot species. So Wallacea is one of the highest threatened place in this region. And hunting and trapping for the pets trade was also high in Wallacea, but also in the Pacific region. So now if you look into different parts of the world, colleagues, Berkunski and other co-authors, more than 100 scientists wrote and published a paper in 2017 about the parrots in the Neotropics. And here they didn't look into species level, but they even went further. They looked into population level, and they analyzed 192 population data, which included 96 parrot species from 21 countries. So this way, if you look at the population level, it can be an early warning into interspecific variability if one subspecies or a population is more threatened in one certain region than on other. So what they found, even with their analysis, that in the Neotropics, 38% of these populations were declining. And the main reason for this decline was, again, mainly the agriculture, the pet trade, logging, and human intrusion and disturbances to their habitat, and natural system modification, and so on. but you see that a very high number of populations were actually threatened by these main factors that we also found in the species level, in the Oceanian and global perspective as well. So interestingly, from these 192 populations, only 77 populations had some kind of research going on at that time. And most of the research, like see 63 populations, has been studied their breeding biology or feeding ecology, habitat use, and then less research on ecology, pet trade, and just 4 populations were studied about the disease, the disease to the parrots, or the genetics, some kind of genetic studies to them. So this again shows that we need more research on those species in that region as well to understand better the situation. And the same is true for Africa, for the Afrotropics. This is a study from Martin and his colleagues. What they found is if you compare studies before 2000, you see that there are very few studies per species in African parrot species. And after 2000, like between 2001 and 2012, there are a big jump on parrot studies per species, but it's mainly driven by southern distribution, like species that distributed to the southern part of Africa. So they also highlighted an urgent need for more research and monitoring programs on African species as well. They also reported persecution at agricultural areas, and almost all large parrot species, their populations are declining as well. And they find that exploitation for the pet trade was really high and hard on parrot species in Africa, as we also find that for that region. And this is just an example on one species, actually 2 species now, the African gray and the timneck parrot, the Psittacus genus. So you see here are the years, like the timeline, and the number of exported individual, like live individual exported from the countries from Africa. And the black line shows the wild source when these individuals were captured in the wild. So you see in the high, in the 90s, 2000, 2005, for 50,000 or over 50,000 per year exported wild individuals from Africa. And then after 2005, it dropped. But then this dotted line, the captive bred individuals were high skyrocketing and reached over 80,000 birds per year. In 2016, these 2 species were uplisted to the endangered category by IUCN, and 1 year later, 17, the CITES that protects the species from the international trade, they uplisted these species to Appendix 1, which is the highest the highest protection from the international trade. But 3 countries, and one of these countries, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, reserved from this decision, which means they still considering that this species belongs to the Appendix 2. And DRC is also one of the main exporter of this species. So this is not a good news. And also Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they also reserved, and they are one of the main importers and distributors of this species. So this study showed that wild source parrots were laundered through South Africa, like lots of parrots from South Africa with breeding facilities were imported from other parts of Africa and then re-exported as captive bred individuals. Like this study showed, like many of these breeding facilities could not have produced in that quantity of birds without importing wild sourced individuals as well. So unfortunately in Africa, there are still harvest quotas that are not based on very robust or scientific information. and still they don't even really monitor that very strictly, and they don't keep that quotas very precise, like they always have more parrots exported than the quota. And that's also that used to be true in other countries, in other regions as well. So that's another thing why it's really important to have more monitoring program in African countries as well about parrots, to have a better understanding the effect on the wild populations that's causing the illegal pet trade. And finally, I would like to talk about this new study that we just published this year with David Vergara Tabares and colleagues. So David and his colleagues from Argentina, they looked into different models that explain the global trends of habitat destruction. And we looked at three different categories. The first one was the forest loss in different maps. So forest loss here we defined as either agricultural areas expanding in one region, or urban habitats are expanding, like cities, roads, and other human urban areas on a landscape. So here we downloaded maps from 2000 from the global land cover maps from the European Space Agency that did not only have information about these exact factors, but also many different information on the map, but we only extracted these two information from 2000. Then we looked at 2018, which is a contemporary kind of screenshot of our world today. We used here the tree cover loss platform, which provided a really narrow 30-meter resolution on our Earth on about the same information about forest loss. And then we also used a model, a predictive model for 2050. That's the harmonized global land use model, which predicted how our Earth gonna look like, in 30 years from now, using different statistical model that can predict the forest loss by that time. The second category that we looked at was the habitat degradation. And here habitat degradation is actually defined by logging, so extracting of timber from the landscape, and not because of agriculture or urban expansion, but for wood extraction or logging. So we actually use this number, the ton per square kilometer. We also used the global map of timber extraction and the same model for 2050. And this was a proxy for not only logging, but also losing nests, because most of the parrot species are really dependent on nesting in trees. And also the poaching, because it's like more trees are logged, it gives more access to actually go into that forest if there's a road and actually harvest species from that forest. And the third area that we looked at were the protected areas, and that was only available for the current snapshot 2018. And we downloaded like all the terrestrial protected areas distribution on Earth and overlapped that with different parrot distributions, which were weighted by different factors, like how dependent they are on the forest or how threatened they are. And so here we can see the consequences of these habitat distractions for parrots, for the conservation of parrots. So first, we look at the first model, the forest loss, again, that defined by agriculture and urban expansion. So these maps are showing conservation hotspots for parrot conservation in relation to these kind of land uses. If you look at these maps, and this might not be very visible on your screen, but I can also send you the original article, or you can find it on Global Change Biology website. So these by column, you see the different years, like this is the past in 2000 and the present 2018 and the predicted future for 2050. And the purple colors show the places where are human modified forest loss, like these expansions, and the green where there are no. And the deepness of the colors, like the darker the color, it means that there are more parrots are affected and in higher threat level. So if you look at the future, we have, for example, hotspots in the northern Andes part in the northern South America, and also the southeastern Australian region. That, if you remember, we had a lot of parrot species distributing in that part. There's a really hotspot that that predicts a high impact on forest loss on parrot species in the future. And of course, Africa as well. But as you will see, this is not so much of a predicted problem for Central Africa. It's more like to the Western African region. And here, the bar plots next to each map represents that how different have the conservation status that I mentioned, from least concerned to critically endangered, from the left to the right, are affected by that time and in that region. So, for example, if you look at Africa, for example, in 2050, you see that most of the parrot species, about 50%, they can expect about 50% of the distribution area loss, as the forest is going to be lost due to agriculture or urban expansion in that region in that time. Here is the second model that is looking into the habitat degradation due to timber extraction. And here you see horizontally the 2 time snap, 2018, the present. You see the 2 hotspots that are also affected by habitat degradation here and here. And these are the predicted models for 2050. What's interesting though here, that we can spot 2 further hotspots. One is in the Indonesian part of New Guinea. So the western part of New Guinea, very heavy habitat degradation predicted due to logging, and also the Amazon basin here. And that's also continues into the future, 2050, where you see, like, for example, Bolivia is very heavily affected. And Africa, Central Africa, DRC is really purple, which means it has a high effect of food extraction on parrot species living in that region, and which gets even worse if we go into 2050. And finally, we also looked at how the changes, have these different changes by 2050 will affect the conservation status of these parrot species. So here each circle represents one species of parrot that has distribution relative to the size of the circle. And the big circles around them, they are different categories by the B1 criterion of IUCN. So this B1 criterion says that, for example, if you have one species that has a distribution between 20,000 and 5,000 square kilometer only, that that species can be vulnerable, and different for critical endangered and endangered categories as well. It's important to note, though, that this is not the only criterion in IUCN. They use different criteria to actually list one species to be vulnerable, critically endangered, etc. But we only looked into this one single criterion that predicts where the species will belong by 2050. And we only look at this one, we will see that that most of the species gotta be stepping up at least one or at some points 2 steps into the endangered scale of IUCN. For example, you see that here for the Africa region, the lesser Vasa parrot could be critically endangered by this scale, and in Oceania and Asia, where we lumped together these two big regions here, the Nicobar parakeet and the crimson shining parrot, they could be extremely endangered, so critically endangered by this scale. And the results that show the protected areas, like how the protected areas actually overlap with different parrot distribution and conservation status, you see that it's actually not very good. So in most regions like Africa, America, and here Australasia and Oceania, you see that the average is below 10%, which means like about the mean overlap with the protected areas for different status of parrots. They only overlap about 10% or less, and very rarely it's a bit more. Which means that these protected areas are not really protecting these species. And what you would expect is that, for example, protected areas are focusing on preserving especially threatened species. As you see, this is actually the opposite in parrots. Like the critically endangered species are actually less represented by protected areas than we would expect normally. So this is another implication for policy making, that when a nation is making a new protected area, it's really important to look into where the different, and not just parrot, this is just an example for parrot, but different species distributions are. And finally, this is just an example that a recent study I've worked on, but relevant because of the habitat loss and southeastern Australian distribution of this swift parrot, the Latamus discolor. This parrot is already critically endangered as of today. It's a nomadic migratory parrot flying between the mainland Australia and Tasmania. They have two main requirements for breeding. One of them, they need, of course, 3 hollows to breed in, but also food from flowering trees, eucalypt trees. And as you see, they always breed in Tasmania, and depending on which year, which season, these different eucalypt trees are flowering, they're gonna breed in that location. Sometimes it's on the mainland, Tasmania, and sometimes it's offshore small islands in the southeastern part of Tasmania. What we recently find, and we just published this study this year, was that if you compare it to 1988, 2010, and even the estimation of 2020 by BirdLife, we actually find much lower estimated census size of individual swift parrots. All our genetic estimation predicted that there are actually less than 500 individuals. So, this is also underlying the critically endangered status of these species. And if you remember, I mentioned for Australasia and Oceania, the invasive species are really threatening. And this is the case in the swift parrots as well. Sugar gliders, that I was smiling when Debbie showed us the sugar gliders on the entrance, that sometimes they're kept as pets, but here the natural distribution is in Australia and all the way up to New Guinea. But they also distributed in Tasmania, and no one really knew whether they were naturally distributed on the island or that was an introduction. They suspected that was an introduction in the 1830s, like human-induced introductions, that human introduced this species to Tasmania, but it didn't have any evidences for that. And by a national law, in Tasmania, all mammals are protected, so all native ones, and marsupials in this case. And this is because because they consider this as a native species. But looking at the genetics of different museum specimens and captured individuals in Tasmania and around the distribution, Campbell et al. In 2018 published a research that actually showed they do belong, they're very close to related to animals in Victoria, and the separation occurred within the past 150 years. So this was like an evidence that it didn't occur naturally, it was actually introduced, and this is important for the policy making, because now sugar gliders eradication can be legally possible by taking them out of the protected status in Tasmania, because these are the main predators that eating not just stiff parrots, but also many other birds in the island. And these are kind of the case in many other tropical Pacific islands as well. So conclusions, what can you do? I often being asked of, that's all nice, but what can we do? And you know, this is a very complex issue, so there's not a single solution for that. Reducing, you know, what can you do? Different categories, like for example, against agriculture, you can't really do there and start stopping the agriculture to expand. But for example, it's a very slow process, but you can reduce your meat consumption, or just stop eating meat. It will actually be healthier for you as well, but also for the planet. But really reducing it, or just looking at that you have you source your meat from really local sources, and actually supporting your local community, and not, for example, importing it from Brazil and things like that. If you like documentaries, there are really good ones, award-winning documentaries about this topic that really deeply into the discussion of this topic, like Cowspiracy or The Game Changers on Netflix. I'm sure they're on other platforms as well. And this is all as part of the One Health approach, you know, like if you keep yourself different way but healthier, you can also keep the environment and the wildlife living in that environment healthier as well. What can we do against logging and destruction of the forest? Again, like here, it comes down to papers, for example. You can minimize the use of non-recycled papers. Don't just start using plastic all of a sudden. So of course, don't use single-use plastics for different reasons as well. But just try to reduce, you know, like don't print stuff out, and I often think of, like, when buying a book, just using like an ebook instead. Or I can look, and I don't know if you considered when you buy a book, in all the books these days, you can see if it's an FSC, like a Forest Stewardship Council certified papers. It would be really important to buy, if you buy any papers, that it has it's sourced from a location that FSC certified, and it's like not some illegal way. About the parrot trade, this is also a very complex issue, and you know, owning pet parrots and this kind of demand. You know, parrots are not for everyone. So if anyone is considering buying a parrot, I would just urge to reconsider of buying one. It's a huge responsibility of looking after parrots. You know, they have a big need of big aviaries and flying, and they need lots of attention, and not many people can give it. So I saw, you know, lots of examples where they are very bad location keeping pets, or someone just didn't think of like how long these birds can live. So, but if you do buy parrots as pets, just only buy from really trusted breeders, and always check, you know, the source. Do some research about about the breeder, consult, ask, and talk a lot through, and then make a decision. Like, don't just do it from one day and another. And definitely don't do it like through the internet on these different Facebook forums and things, because unfortunately lots of the illegally sold parrots are on these kind of closed platforms like email list or Facebook or different social media stuff. I was participating in one of a confiscation here in Hungary, where some African greys were parrots were sold on Facebook, and that resulted to be actually an illegal bird without papers or any bans. So always go to to the breeders and just the trusted ones that have a good reputation. And also consider adopting parrots. Maybe you just don't need to buy one from since as a chick or an adult, you can also adopt some parrots. I know that some organizations in the US do that adoption thing. I think Phoenix Landing, maybe Debbie can give some more information about that. And yeah, there's lots of parrots that need to be adopted, so that could be another way of sourcing or owning or looking after a parrot. Well, about introduced species, again, this is more like a national level legislation. Like you can't really do much about it unless you always declare any biohazard risk when you enter a country. You often, if you still remember when we used to fly to some foreign countries, we had to fill out like this declaration form. And for example, once when I was entering to Australia, I was actually coming from a place that, they're asking if you've been to a farm or somewhere, and I always just like take no. And I said, yeah, I was actually on a farm, and I even, I was in the field in Indonesia. So I declared, and if you declare, it's nothing happened. It's not like something, again, you just telling the truth. And they actually cleaned my boots with all the disinfectants and stuff. So actually a win-win situation. So this is just a silly example, but that you can. It's really important that you can introduce not only pathogens, but also other species as well. Yeah, definitely don't let your pets free, because that's another source. And often people just let they turtles or birds or I don't know what have you free in the wild to get free. So that's not a good idea either, because that contributes to the invasive species if they survive in the wild. And just get well informed from proper sources, and often scientific literature. It's a bit hard to read, and it's hard to access sometimes because it's often behind paywalls. So this is not a perfect system either. If you need any scientific paper, ask me or any other colleagues on research credits or what have you. For example, with many colleagues now, we try to communicate our research in a more down-to-earth way of better understanding video abstracts and news articles. So just always look at where your news are coming from, and that's just like in general, it's important. And also vote wisely. Like that's we can't really influence the decision makings or the legal terms, the policies, unless we work in that sector. But we can we can vote, and whatever we vote, that kind of people what we voted for, they would represent our views. So that's also very important to vote wisely. And if you have some extra money and would like to donate, that also consider donating to research or conservation projects via charities. It's these days, it's like very easy to donate to charities and to specific projects. So I would personally recommend you not to donate like the big international conservation organization. I don't want to name them here, but I often find like if more specific causes, more specific local organizations, there are lots of very good organizations that need your help, and lots of them are run by very enthusiastic people which can use that, and most of your money is not it doesn't get lost in huge overheads and international offices and that kind of way. But if you target or just like pick one cause that is really close to you and just donate to that one. And for example, wildlife messengers, where we're gonna talk about, like, we make films. If you like films about conservation, you can donate to us, but it's not something you need to, if you want to donate like other organizations like the Flight Cup Foundation in your region, or the Indonesian Parrot Project that Bonnie is gonna talk about what they do in Indonesia. And all these different local projects. I think that it's your money will be well spent within those organizations. And you can also have like a direct contact and a call or something, that you can be sure that your money goes where it's intended to. But just keep in mind, donating is not an indulgence. Like, it's not something you just pay and then you can just do whatever. So it's not just like paying off for your sin. It's just something nice if you consider to an extra support for the environment. And just in general, like, just go green. Being green is always good for the planet, for yourself, as I mentioned, just in the One Health approach. Everyone benefits. So with that, closing thoughts, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you're still there, and I'm not just talking here and to my internet. You can reach me on this email below, and I'm going to talk about this new project that we have with Wildlife Messengers about a new film project about extinct macaws of the Caribbean region that went recently, I mean, like within historic time, extinct within a few hundred years. But I plan to talk more about that on, I think it's next Friday, right? It's in my talk about like different films for conservation purposes and so on. And thank you very much again for your attention.